At 2:37 p.m. on March 18, 1945, Sergeant Mike Sullivan stood in the control tower at San Pancrazio Air Base in Italy when he sighted something that made him question his sanity. A B-24 Liberator bomber was approaching the runway with its right wing virtually non-existent. Not damaged. Not riddled. Non-existent. Half the structure simply was no longer there, yet the aircraft remained airborne, defying all known laws of aerodynamics. Sullivan grabbed the radio and yelled, "Emergency! B-24 on critical approach. Prepare ambulances and fire trucks." But his voice trembled not just from urgency, but from the sheer disbelief of what his eyes witnessed. That plane should not have been flying. It should have been scattered wreckage across the Alps hours ago. But there it was, shaking, banked 30 degrees to the right, its four engines roaring in a desperate effort against gravity. The story of that B-24 had begun 9 hours earlier, when no one imagined they would witness the impossible. At 6:15 that morning, Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Cochran, a 23-year-old pilot, conducted his 9-man crew briefing. The mission looked simple on paper: bomb the Rulland oil refineries in Germany as part of a 48-bomber B-24 formation. His plane, nicknamed Lady Luck, had only 4 months of service and was considered one of the most reliable in the 15th Air Force. Cochran was superstitious, and before every mission he touched the 4-leaf clover painted on the fuselage. But that morning, co-pilot Lieutenant Robert Hayes noticed something strange. "Jimmy, did you see the forecast? 90 miles per hour winds over the Alps on the way back." Cochran shrugged. "Lady Luck has brought us back 31 times. Today will be number 32. At 7:42, Lady Luck took off in formation. The first part of the mission went without incident. At 11:20 a.m., the bombers reached their target and dropped their ordnance on the German refineries. Secondary explosions confirmed direct hits on the fuel tanks. The formation turned 180 degrees to return to base. That is when everything fell apart. At 11:47, as the formation flew over the Austrian Alps at 22,000 feet, the tail gunner, Sergeant Billy Thompson, yelled over the intercom, "Fighters! 6 o'clock. Messerschmitt 109s. At least 15 of them." The German fighters emerged from the clouds like angry wasps. They were elite Luftwaffe pilots, veterans who knew every weak point of the B-24. The bomber was nicknamed the Flying Coffin by the Germans due to the vulnerable fuel tanks in the wings. The first attack came in a vertical dive. 20mm cannons began tearing through the formation. Lady Luck was in the most exposed position, on the right flank of the formation. Cochran yelled, "Evasive maneuver. Everyone to their guns." But a fully loaded B-24 is not agile. It weighs 32 tons and responds slowly to commands. The first Messerschmitt passed so close that Cochran could see the German pilot's face. The 20mm burst hit Lady Luck's right wing with a sound that Hayes would later describe as 1,000 simultaneous hammer blows against a sheet of metal. The instrument panel exploded in red alerts. Engine number 3, on the right wing, began spewing black smoke. O'Brien, the flight engineer, activated the fire suppression system, but the engine was dead. "Engine 3 out." O'Brien yelled. Losing hydraulic pressure. A second Messerschmitt attacked from the left. This time, tracer rounds sliced through the fuselage, puncturing the bombardier's compartment. Sergeant Anderson, in the plane's nose, was hit in the shoulder. The radio operator crawled to him with the medical kit while the gunner's .50 caliber machine guns thundered in response. But the worst was yet to come. At 11:52, a third Messerschmitt positioned itself perfectly at Lady Luck's 6 o'clock, in the blind spot where the tail gunner had difficulty aiming. The German pilot was experienced. He knew exactly where to shoot. The cannon burst hit the root of the right wing, where it connects to the fuselage. It is the most critical structural point of any airplane. A B-24 wing is built with a single main aluminum spar that runs the entire wingspan. That burst severed the spar. What happened next defied physics. The outer section of the right wing, from engine number 3 to the tip, began to fold upward. The metal screamed. Rivets began popping like popcorn. And then, with a sound Cochran described as the shriek of a metal monster, the last 4 meters of the wing broke off completely. The wingtip spun in the air for a moment, reflecting the sunlight, before plummeting towards the snow-covered mountains 7,000 meters below. Lady Luck rolled violently 60 degrees to the right. Cochran and Hayes pulled the yokes to the left with full force, using their entire body weight. Cochran's muscles burned, his hands gripping the controls so hard his knuckles were white. "We're going down. Prepare to bail out," Hayes shouted. The altimeter spun wildly. 21,000 feet. 20,000. 19,000. But Cochran did not give up. "We still have control. We are still flying. It was technically true, but only technically. The plane was in a controlled dive, permanently banked 30 degrees to the right, shaking as if it would disintegrate at any moment. The 3 remaining engines roared at maximum limit, 2 of them compensating for the loss of lift from the right wing. O'Brien checked the systems. Jimmy, we've lost 40% of the right wing's lift. Fuel consumption increased 60%. The right wing tanks are leaking. We don't have enough fuel to reach base. Then we'll try, Cochrane replied, his voice firm despite the panic in his eyes. The bomber formation continued without them. There was no way to help. In the aerial combat over Europe, a damaged plane was on its own. The Messerschmitts, having expended their ammunition, turned back toward their bases. Lady Luck was alone over the Alps, with half a wing missing, bleeding fuel, flying at an impossible angle, still 300 kilometers from Italy. At 12:15 p.m., Lady Luck crossed the Austrian border into Italy. The crew did not celebrate. They knew the real challenge was just beginning. Hayes did the math. Jimmy, based on current consumption and speed, we will run out of fuel approximately 80 kilometers from base. Then we'll make sure we get to 81 kilometers, Cochrane replied. But keeping the plane airborne required absolute concentration. Cochrane and Hayes worked in perfect sync, one pilot never letting go of the controls while the other rested his arms for 30 seconds. They couldn't relax for an instant. The slightest distraction and the plane would roll to the right and enter a fatal spin. O'Brien obsessively monitored every gauge. Engine number 1 overheating. Engine number 2 losing oil pressure. Engine number 4 is fine, but it has been working at the limit for an hour. Thompson, the tail gunner who had the best view of the damaged wing, reported, "Guys, you need to see this. The wing it's vibrating. I can see cracks spreading through the metal. It looks like a spider web. How many holes can you count?" Hayes asked. Thompson was silent for a moment, counting. "I stop counting when I reach 100. There are hundreds. Easily over 1,000 holes just in the section I can see. 1,000 holes. And the plane was still flying." At 1:30 p.m., they flew over the Dolomite Mountains. Altitude was critical. Too high, and the thin air would demand more from the damaged engines. Too low, and they would have no margin to glide if the engines failed. Cochrane kept the plane at 12,000 feet, the minimum safe altitude over the mountains. That's when Morrison, the navigator, delivered the news everyone feared. "Jimmy, I just redid the calculations. With the headwind we're facing and the increased fuel consumption, we won't make it to San Pancrazio. We're going down 40 kilometers from base." Silence on the intercom. Then Cochrane spoke, his voice calm but determined. "We have parachutes. If the engines die, we jump. But as long as this old lady keeps flying, we keep piloting. Understood?" "Understood," everyone replied in unison. At 2:10 p.m., engine number 1 started coughing. O'Brien tried adjusting the fuel mixture, but it was useless. The engine was starving. "Shutting down engine number 1, O'Brien announced. 2 engines remaining. 2 engines. To sustain 32 tons of damaged metal, with half a wing missing, against 90 miles per hour winds. Physics said it was impossible. But Lady Luck kept flying." At 2:35 p.m., Hayes spotted the San Pancrazio runways in the distance. "Base in sight. 5 kilometers. Morrison checked the tanks. Fuel for 3 more minutes. Maybe 4. Cochrane grabbed the radio. "San Pancrazio Tower, this is Lady Luck. Requesting emergency landing clearance. We have critical structural damage, half the right wing lost, 2 engines out, 1 injured aboard." There was a long pause. Then Sullivan's voice replied, trembling, "Lady Luck, tower confirms." "Did you say half the right wing?" "Affirmative, tower. Half the wing is missing. Approximately 4 meters of the tip." Another pause. "Lady Luck, we'll prepare emergency crews. Good luck." Cochrane began the final descent. It was the most dangerous part. A normal landing requires reducing speed, lowering the landing gear, and adjusting the flaps. But Lady Luck could not make a normal landing. "Hayes, if I reduce speed too much, we lose lift and crash. If I maintain high speed, we will overshoot the runway. And we can't use flaps because we'll roll to the right instantly." Hayes nodded. "Then we land fast, no flaps, and pray the brakes hold." "What about the landing gear?" O'Brien asked. "The right hydraulic system is dead. The right will might not come down." Cochrane made a decision. "We lower the landing gear manually. O'Brien, you and Thompson go to the landing gear bay and hand pump. We have 2 minutes." O'Brien and Thompson descended to the landing gear compartment, where an emergency manual pump could extend the wheels without hydraulics. They pumped frantically while Cochrane lined up the plane with the runway tower, entering final approach. In the control tower, Sullivan and other officers watched in horror. The B-24 descended, banked 30 degrees, with a visibly mutilated wing, shaking like a leaf in the wind. Ambulances and fire trucks lined the runway. Landing gear extended. O'Brien shouted. 500 feet altitude. 400. 300. The plane was coming down too fast. 180 miles per hour. A normal landing speed is 110 miles per hour. But Cochrane had no choice. 200 feet. 100. Prepare for impact, Cochrane yelled. The wheels touched the concrete at 170 miles per hour with a sound like an explosion. The tires instantly smoked. Cochrane slammed the brakes with all his might. Hayes pulled the throttles back, shutting down the engines. Lady Luck screeched down the runway, consuming 300 meters, 400, 500. The runway was 1,800 meters long. They were going 180 miles per hour and needed to stop in less than a kilometer. Hayes engaged the emergency brakes. The smell of burning rubber filled the cabin. 140 miles per hour. 120. 100. Come on, old girl, hold. Cochrane pleaded. 80 miles per hour. 60. 40. With only 200 meters of runway remaining, Lady Luck finally stopped. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the hiss of the engines cooling and the ticking of contracting metal. Then Hayes turned to Cochrane. Did we just land? Cochrane looked at his trembling hands on the controls. I think so. Thompson opened the emergency hatch. Everyone out. Now. The crew evacuated quickly. Anderson, the injured bombardier, was carried out by O'Brien and Morrison. As the last man jumped, Cochrane and Hayes climbed down the nose ladder. When their feet touched the ground, Cochrane's legs gave way. Hayes held him up. Together, they looked back at Lady Luck. The plane was covered in holes. The fuselage looked like Swiss cheese. Hydraulic fluids and fuel ran onto the concrete in puddles. And the right wing? There was no right wing. Just a twisted structure of metal that ended abruptly in the air. Sullivan ran up to them with a team of mechanics. He looked at the B-24, then at Cochrane, then back at the plane. Lieutenant, how the hell did you land that? Cochrane had no answer. He just looked at Hayes, who was equally perplexed. In the following 3 days, 27 Boeing engineers examined Lady Luck's wreckage. They counted 1,247 bullet and shrapnel holes. They measured that 4.2 meters of the right wing had been completely ripped off. They calculated that the plane was generating only 61% of the lift required for level flight. The official engineering report concluded, by all known laws of aerodynamics and structural engineering, Lady Luck should not have remained airborne for more than 90 seconds after the loss of the wing section. The 2-hour and 45-minute flight to base defies technical explanation. A senior Boeing engineer wrote a handwritten note in the margin of the report, this plane flew purely by the determination of its crew. Physics should have said no. But 9 men said yes. Cochrane was awarded the Medal of Honor. His crew received Distinguished Service Crosses. Lady Luck never flew again. The structure was too compromised. It was disassembled, and pieces were distributed as reminders of the impossible. Years later, in 1989, Cochrane gave a lecture at a pilot school. A young cadet asked, "Sir, what went through your mind when the wing broke off?" Cochrane thought for a long moment. "I thought of 9 men counting on me. I thought of their families. And I thought that as long as that plane had one engine running and one wing attached, we had a chance. Sometimes, physics is wrong. And sometimes, the impossible is just difficult." He touched the small piece of metal in his pocket, a fragment of the 4-leaf clover painted on Lady Luck's fuselage. And sometimes, he smiled, you just need a little luck. Lady Luck had lived up to her name one last time.